Those who do not know, um, this is Dr. Diana Quinn. She earned her Bachelor's of Arts in Cultural Anthropology from the University of Michigan with a focus on religion and ritual, ethnobotany, and medical anthropology. She received a doctorate in naturopathic medicine at the National University of Natural Medicine. Dr. Quinn was certified in psychedelic assisted therapy and research at CIIS's CPTR program and is a co-founder of the Psychedelic Liberation Collective for queer and BIPOC practitioners, offering psychedelic integration circles for BIPOC and 2S LGBTQIA plus communities, as well as anti-racism integration circles for white allies. She also serves as the training director at the Alma Institute and the assistant director of community care at Naropa's University Psychedelic Assisted Therapies training program. Dr. Quinn serves on multiple advisory boards dedicated to building ethical integrity, equity, accessibility, and structural competency in the field of psychedelic medicine. I am very pleased to have her and really excited to see what she has for us today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for that warm welcome and introduction. And it's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you all. So I'll prepare my slides here and just share that, kind of given what Zach just kind of mentioned about my various hats that I wear and work that I do in the field, astrology is not mentioned because this is sort of my, debut, as it were, for speaking kind of publicly or in a professional capacity in a way that integrates astrology with some of the clinical work and therapeutic work that I do, and I know that you all do as well. So I hope that this is of interest. I will be providing a pretty solid kind of foundational framework for all of the topics that I'll be covering. So even with no background or, kind of knowledge of astrology, it'll still be hopefully accessible. I'll try not to go too deep. Just feel free to chime in if there's anything that I need to slow down on. So just going ahead here. Oh, sorry, slide mishaps. Here is where we want to be. So beyond the intro that was already shared, I just want to name that I live on as a guest on Waiwiatanong, also known as Detroit, Michigan, born and raised in Southeast Michigan, also known as Anishinaabe-Aki, the territories of the Council of the Three Fires, Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi, and home to 12 federally recognized tribes. And this is a pic of me standing there next to Lake Michigan on our western shore of the Mitten in Wiwi-Gitchagami, as it's known in Ojibwe. So I'll be speaking from an orientation grounded in the traditional Hellenistic astrology approach. My own personal interest with astrology has spanned over a decade, and kind of my introduction was through the lens of modern astrology and reading, weekly horoscopes and the kinds of things that most folks are pretty familiar with. And as I've gotten deeper, I really have just been taken by some of the ancient texts that have become more recently integrated into contemporary understanding of astrology because they were translated from the ancient Greek in the late 1990s through a project called Project Hindsight. So this traditional lens, the Hellenistic astrological approach, has its origins in Babylonia, the Indus Valley region, Egypt, Greece, and then through following the Roman conquest of Egypt in the 1st century BCE, was later spread throughout the Roman Empire and is really the foundation of kind of what has become, kind of how we understand Western astrology today, although many of the tenets and sort of principles had been kind of previously lost. So this is a little bit of a reclamation of the roots of that system. And I also just want to frame the conversation with this quote: "The finger that points to the moon is not the moon." So the map is not the territory. Astrology is a language. And there are many different frameworks and languages and lenses through which human beings on the planet have observed the movements of the planets and the stars and been in relationship with the night sky and the elements of the more than human world. So I've also studied other systems and frameworks from the Mesoamerican tradition, for example. There's also a robust Indian Vedic tradition I'm not quite as familiar with, but just want to, kind of frame that, we're speaking about maps here, we're speaking about languages and symbols. So it's the best, kind of approach that humans have for, making sense of the world in which we live. So we'll start here with the origins of what we now understand to be the zodiac, which has its roots in ancient Egypt and was adopted by the Greeks, and was originally developed through observation of the seasonal variations in light and dark and the energetic qualities associated with the gradations of light and dark throughout the year. So, so this depiction of the symbols of the zodiac that you see in this image also is depicted with the cross-quarter points in the year. So the spring equinox and autumn equinox and the summer solstice and winter solstice. So the basically the zodiac, the 12 zodiac zodiac representations are essentially archetypes that were developed through these observations. And as early as the 2nd century, with an early astrologer named Claudius Ptolemy, who was a Roman mathematician and astronomer, the concept of a fixed tropical zodiac, which was a conceptually mathematical perfect circle divided into quarters based on, these seasons or, kind of rotating around these cross-quarter points in the year, was developed. And so this was kind of the foundation of how it was understood to emerge what we now know as the zodiac. So again, back then, 2000 some years ago, the alignment of the spring equinox with the constellation of Aries and the seasonal emergence of the spring equinox was aligned. But because of the principles of physics and wobble of the Earth on its axis and various other wonders of nature, there's something called the precession of the equinoxes, which means that gradually over time, the constellation is no longer in alignment with the actual zodiac season. And so that's according to the tropical zodiac, which is the most commonly used Western astrological framework. So when you read your horoscope in the paper, and if you look up Aries and it's, April, it doesn't actually align with the constellation of Aries in the sky. The sidereal system, which holds to the traditional alignment and modifies the entire system so that it is in continuance with that alignment, does match up. And so there's already kind of an inherent distinction between the use of astrology as sort of a symbolic system of divination, representative of archetypes, versus intending to match literally to the constellations in the physical sky. So this is one of the points that is often made by astronomers and scientists to kind of debunk the concept of astrology, as though astrologers aren't fully aware of this and have known for thousands of years that this is the case. It's just that at this point in time, the way that the zodiac is used and understood is more of a system of divination. It's more of an art. It's more of a symbolic pattern recognition system per se, rather than something that is intended to be literal. So just wanted to give that background. And then by the 5th century, constellations of that, although they exist in the sky of uneven size, they have been applied to this 360-degree circle in exactly equal portions of 30-degree segments. So we see in the early ancient traditional astrological system, these conceptual understandings, even though again they weren't intended to literally match what we observe in the night sky, had become, commonplace. So it's been a very, very long time that Western astrologers have been operating using this system. So these segments of the sky were originally called zoidia in the Greek. Zoidia are understood to be living beings. They are both living, archetypal, multivalent beings, as well as the living temples of the gods that provide a backdrop to the movements of the planets. And the planets were understood in the ancient system as being the visual representation of the gods. So, the zoidia, which are, again, this is the origin of the zodiac. This is how they originally were understood and the framing within the traditional system. Now, the planets in traditional Hellenistic astrology originally only worked with the 7 visible planets before telescopes and other scientific instruments were developed where we could see beyond what's visible with the naked eye. The original 7 visible planets are used in this system. Now, modern practicing traditional astrologers often incorporate the outer planets as well, but according to the workings and the mechanics of the traditional system, these 7 are kind of the fundamental and really build the structure of the system, as it were. And the understanding of the planets themselves was really based in, again, these seasonal variations and the smallest degree of gradation between light and dark, between, kind of points in the year, different seasons, and the movements of the planets over vast periods of time, and also the nature of the planets according to where they fall in a spectrum of hot and cold, or moist and dry. And so these energetic qualities, although they kind of seem archaic today, are actually kind of the origins of most systems of healing all over the planet, which continue, right? So the Ayurvedic system, the Chinese medicine system, European herbal traditions, Mesoamerican healing traditions, all have for thousands of years and continue to incorporate sophisticated understandings of these energetic qualities. So although it, kind of sounds a little, kind of, again, unscientific, we can really sort of think of these things as being energetic qualities that contribute to the characteristics or the archetypal information about the planet itself. So the last key component of the Hellenistic system that I want to cover before we get into our main topic here is the house system. So the houses in traditional astrology were originally called the places, in the Greek, the topoi. And these places indicate areas or topics of life, various arenas in life. It wasn't until later, through the modern evolution of Western astrology, that the houses came to be conflated with the zodiac, such that the designations or delineations of the houses took on a little bit more of characteristics or interpretations that match how we understand the zodiac signs. So in the original traditional system, these places and what they represent in the natal chart of an individual may actually have nothing to do with the person themselves. It may have to do with significant people in the person's life, events that they encounter, travel that they may experience, other things that are external to the actual individual themselves. And the basic working of the system is much less about, kind of a psychological type of framework rather than it is more sort of community-based, if that makes sense. So in the traditional system, the division of houses among these, this 360-degree circle was in 12 equal segments of 30 degrees. And the house system that is used in the Hellenistic model is called the whole sign house system, where the point of the ascendant, which we'll talk more about, I'll unpack, is the cusp of the first house, is, basically it's in the first house no matter what. So even if your ascendant, the point on the horizon at the time of birth was at the 29th degree of that 30-degree slice of pie, the whole first house is still that sign. So that differs from a lot of contemporary modern astrological house systems where the cusp of the first house is that 29 degree, and then that first house may encompass the following sign as well, so they can be blended. So that's not the way that it was done in the traditional system. And over the years, I've come to adopt the whole sign house system myself through, kind of understanding the reasons why that were, which we don't need to spend more time unpacking, but I just want to explain because that sort of is the backdrop to the framework we're using today. So, so we also need to understand the what are called the primary and the secondary motions. And again, this is kind of getting into some astronomy. We'll kind of delve just sort of a little bit into as we're, kind of beginning to unpack the concepts of the angular houses or the rising sign and whatnot. So the primary motion is the motion of the sky through which the planets, the sun and the other planets traverse on the ecliptic from east to west. So you see the sun rise in the east in the morning and follow this ecliptic across the sky, setting in the west. So that's the primary motion. And primary motion is caused by the rotation of the Earth on its axis, right, in a clockwise direction. Secondary motion is the individual motion of planets as they move through the zodiac, the constellations of the fixed stars, which form the backdrop that don't move, right? The planets move, the stars don't move. And that direction is in the opposite direction of primary motion or counterclockwise, and it's caused by the planetary orbit around the sun along the ecliptic. So there's a little graphic here that you can kind of see that little sun rotating, and we get a 24-hour, kind of experience here on Earth. And then throughout the seasons, over the course of a year, we make that complete solar rotation. Now, this framework is similar in many ways to the medicine wheel, which is a traditional Native American, predominantly North American concept and framework that is used by many different tribes, many different cultures, all with somewhat different, perhaps understandings or applications culturally, and not to create sort of a pan-indigenous, conception, but just to say many human beings who were, living in accordance with the rhythms of the movements of the sun and the moon and the planets over time, in close relationship with the Earth, developed pretty similar maps, right? So here we see on the eastern horizon, where the sun is rising, the east, the south, the west, and the north. So these are the four cardinal directions on the medicine wheel. And similarly, again, every culture is somewhat different, but commonly these are also considered to be, if not living beings or entities, deep teachings that have archetypal, multivalent, and comprehensive meaning. So I'm sharing this excerpt from a study by Marsh et al. That was working with Indigenous communities healing and recovering from substance use disorder, wherein they utilized community-based Indigenous traditional healing modalities as part of their intervention. And they mapped their findings actually onto the medicine wheel so that they were incorporating an Indigenous approach to their research. So in the East, the representation is the sunrise, the new dawn, new beginnings, new ideas, this sense of newness, or the opportunity for beginning again, right? In the South, and we're traveling clockwise here. In the South, we have the summer, the season of summer, the emotions, the stage of life where one is maturing into adolescence and adulthood, whereas the East represents the beginnings of life, birth and early childhood. And then toward the West, the physical body, later adulthood, maturity, taking on responsibility, family, developing new awareness, and the beginning of time of finishing things. This is kind of toward the middle age and toward later life. So transitions toward completion. And then the North, representing winter, the mental and the intellectual mind, the having ascertained wisdom, being an elder, and great understanding, as well as healing. So they used this model in their research study as an approach to healing, as being that we're constantly, even though this is over the lifespan, we're continually moving through these cyclical frameworks and patterns throughout our lives. So births, maturation, wisdom, and dying, right? These kind of repetitive cycles that recur throughout our lives, mapping these onto the healing experience. So I'm also including here this resource, the eco-soul development stages of life, that also is sort of designed somewhat to correspond to the medicine wheel as well, with 4 distinct stages, each with 2 subtypes, describing developmental stages of maturation. And this particular work by Plotkin, Bill Plotkin, is also pointing out that these significant stages in traditional cultures are marked with rites of passage, and not having a cultural container that observes those things is one of the many contributors to dis-ease or lack of full maturation into a full adulthood as a collective, right? Sort of culturally, kind of not really moving effectively through the stages to coming into being on a collective level into adulthood. And as we can see, the world that we're living in and some of the problems that humanity is facing on that level, this, the taking responsibility and moving into those higher stages. So this approach, of course, can be used at the individual level through the healing journey as well. And I understand is a commonly used approach that my friend Zach shared with me. So these models, the medicine wheel and this eco-soul development model, very much correspond to the traditional Hellenistic understanding of the house system, and particularly what are called the angular houses. So we're kind of flipping the perspective a little bit, where we've moved east from the right side where we're used to seeing it, kind of on the map, but viewing this as though you're, kind of an observer, kind of on Earth. The flat line on the horizon, being kind of that point on the left where we see the sunrise, we see it culminate, we see it descend, and then we see it disappear, right? And so in the Hellenistic system, that correspondence kind of followed the sequence where birth begins and life begins at this cusp of the first house, at the ascendant, that point where the point on the horizon at the moment of the individual's birth culminates at what's called the midheaven, the peak of the sky at that time, descends at the horizon point, and then drops out of view to the counter culmination point, right? The lowest possible point. So, and then all of the 12 houses in the system and their delineations according to the traditional model are here, and I've provided the PDF for folks that may want to look at that further. Again, this system is using both the primary motion, where we're seeing the sun rise in the counterclockwise direction, culminate, and then descend. And then we're also seeing that counterclockwise motion, the secondary motion, where the planets move through the zodiac in this, counterclockwise trajectory, where the house systems number 1 through 12 in a counterclockwise direction. Okay, so just to kind of recap those 4 points that I just mentioned, the ascendant, the descendant, the midheaven, or the medium coeli, as it was called in the Greek, or the imum coeli. We abbreviate these as MC and IC, so we're not having to, speak Greek, but these are the 4 cross quarter points that I want to focus on for the rest of our time here. So, take a drink of water. So the ascendant, the degree of the ecliptic, where it intersects with the eastern horizon at the moment of one's birth, is the most personal point in the natal chart. So many times when you ask people, what's your sign, they'll tell you based on usually what sign their sun was in at the time of their birth. So I mentioned earlier, Aries, covers the month of April. Usually it's kind of halfway, toward the end of one month and into the next. So that's usually what people know and how they sort of understand what's their sign, right? But in the traditional Hellenistic model, your sign was actually your ascendant. And all of the comprehension of your natal chart that flows from that point is founded upon that distinct point, right? At the time of one's birth in the traditional system, it was believed that was when and where the soul incarnates, right? The soul enters the body. Interestingly, I've really been curious about the parallels between that system and Stan Groff's work around the perinatal matrices and the psychodynamics of birth being, sort of like this imprint that get repeated throughout one's life, right, in this cyclical way. It's sort of like the way that you do one thing is the way you do everything. The ascendant and the degree of the ascendant and a lot of other factors involved with that key point is really kind of the gateway or the entry point to the whole chart and how we understand the interpretation of everything in the individual's natal chart. So since the sign and the ascendant changes every 1 to 2 hours, and it's the degree of the ascendant changes every few minutes, it's very rapidly changing. Even 2 people born at the same location on the same day, would really, even twins don't have the same ascendant often, because it's, it would be like things are going to be at least a few minutes apart, even if, so it's a very, very distinct point, very personal point in the chart. It's again, according to the whole sign house system, it's at the cusp of the first house, which is the delineation of the self. It governs the physical appearance and the body. The traditional system called this point in the first house the hour marker because it set the entire, kind of roadmap for the rest of the chart. Or the helm, basically understanding if your life is a ship, that's the helm, like that's where you're seated, in the driver's seat. You're, kind of orienting from that point. That's the point at which you engage, with the world. So, also, kind of from, maybe a more contemporary understanding, The psychological themes and archetypes pertaining to this house, again, the self and the body, ego development. I mentioned the psychodynamics of birth. So these obviously very, central, very central, right? I do want to just briefly mention here that folks, for any reason, who don't know the time of their birth, as well as the date and the location, can't always precisely ascertain their ascendant. There are methodologies where that information can be deduced through a very systematic process. And many astrologers specialize in doing that work for folks. So I've worked with a few folks and have some family members that are adoptees. And, sometimes for various reasons, that information isn't available. And there are workarounds. Just wanted to mention that. So again, following our trajectory from birth up into, this culminating point, we're up in the midheaven or MC, the highest point in the chart. This is considered to be the most visible and outwardly facing point. This is where what you are known for, what you, many times we kind of think of this in modern, contemporary society as, what someone's career is. But really, in the traditional system, this was what was called praxis, meaning what are you practicing? What are your actions? What's your efficacy? How are you showing up in the world? It also can be tied to legacy, including children. Very much can be tied to wisdom and maturity. So as well, the 10th house, or I'm sorry, the MC, kind of this top point of the chart, because in the whole house system, it can fall in different locations depending on which house system you use. Usually in the whole sign house system, it's either the 9th, 10th, or 11th house, although again, other house systems, it can vary. This point and the house it's associated with can sometimes be associated with either the mother or the gestating parent. Alternatively, it can be associated with the father. So you'll see both kind of throughout the literature. Interestingly, I think because the association with the father and this, kind of like responsibility and what's visible on the outside and, kind of projecting outward, that kind of became the association. But in the traditional system, it was more that who your mother is, who gave birth to you. You don't necessarily always know who the father, who the where the paternity came from. It's actually the mother that's the most visible parent, whereas the other parent is not. So that's just kind of making that distinction, because those archetypes can also come into play with our interpretation psychologically. So the descendant, which falls on the natal chart right opposite the ascendant, kind of exactly to the degree opposite, as known as the setting in the traditional system. So this is, the sun has risen, it has culminated, and now it is setting. And the planets, follow that path as well. So it has inherent to it this energy of, kind of like descending, or, coming into completion or finality, aging, decline, sometimes had been associated with, illness or injury. So, but it also represents relationship with the other, right? Because we have throughout the, if one bookend is, myself, the other bookend is the other, and I develop an understanding of who I am in relationship to others, right? So this concept of looking glass self or social mirror theory is sort of embedded in the concept of the descendant, and that 7th house of relationships, where it's on the cusp of the sign and the zodiac sign of the 7th house and the descendant itself can also provide information about who you're attracted to, who's attracted to you, not necessarily even romantically, but just who are the kind of people that you gravitate toward. As well, who are the people who pushed you out of your comfort zone or challenge you. This is also the house of open enemies. So it's not always easy relationships, but often significant ones. So, and then finally, the IC, the point where the ecliptic crosses the meridian and the lowest point in the chart, this is representative of the foundation and the roots of one's life. So one's origins, their ancestry, their lineage, as well, family of origin and their home life. This is what is most interior and private. It's hidden below the horizon. Nobody sees it. It's not outward. So this is your private life, your home life. Psychological themes associated here. Again, the father, alternatively the mother, depending on who you ask. And intergenerational trauma, other inherited ancestral patterns, family of origin issues. So there's plenty here to work with. Anything that is hidden and subterranean, including exiled parts, the inner child, lots of things that the individual may not even be in direct contact with consciously, that influence and shape their lives and decisions. And then, of course, the final transition of death, because this is the lowest point after the full rotation of the planets before rebirth, and the whole cycle begins again. So I mentioned previously that in the traditional Hellenistic system, each of these 4 points falls in what are called the angular houses, the first, fourth, seventh, and 10th. And again, these are the delineations or key elements. There are others, but these are the most kind of critical things that are happening in these houses. Okay, so transitioning now to talk a bit about how do we use this when we're exploring, either our own, path in life, our own natal chart, or working with clients, right? So I just raised a few key points here that can be relevant, can be useful. So we have, for example, major astrological transits that are occurring, such as, so this would be things that are not just your natal chart, but what's actually happening right now. Okay, so significant transits of Saturn, for example. If you've heard the term your Saturn return, you may know that what that means is every 28-ish years, Saturn makes its full trip through the zodiac and comes back to the place where it was when you were born. So between ages 28 and 30, roughly, folks are having their first Saturn return. And usually this is a very significant point in life. It can depend a little bit upon the nature of Saturn and its placement in their chart, the sign that it's in, various other factors. But for many folks, usually between the ages of 28 and 30, folks are kind of coming sort of into their own. They're, getting on a trajectory, taking maybe more personal responsibility for their lives, et cetera. So in addition to that 28-year full cycle, every major aspect, whether it's in a square to the natal Saturn, opposite the natal Saturn, or squaring from the other side before it makes that return, that full cycle at age 28 and roughly 56 and so on, et cetera, depending on the longevity. All of those points are also significant because it's raising issues. I choose Saturn in particular because it's a planet that really raises issues about responsibility, limits, boundaries, structure, things that we really need to contend with. You don't have a choice. It's not like I'll get to that later. It's like, no, you're going to deal with it now. And if you don't deal with it well, it's going to come back again, So this is just, these are the, kind of understandings and delineations of the planet Saturn. So so those are transpersonal kind of transits, so I'm referring to basically an individual's response to, kind of how astrological transits may be affecting their own natal chart. There are also what are considered mundane or transpersonal planetary transits that are taking place that affect all of us, right? And there have been some very significant sort of era-defining astrological transits in the last few years. I mean, you may have noticed that things have been kind of a little bit, not so business as usual the last few years. So, so things have really been shaken up. And again, I don't, just want to emphasize that the traditional Hellenistic approach in most systems of astrology that I have followed don't kind of interpret the planets as being, causal, or that it's like because, of these aspects. It's more like it's a clock. The planets are telling us what time it is. And it's like, oh, okay, we've come around to this again, haven't been here for a few thousand years. Now we're, here we are. Time for, empire to come, what have you, so anyway. So those significant transpersonal transits having generational impact, affecting everyone on the planet, no matter who you are, no matter what your natal chart is, are also taking place as the backdrop. And Stan Grof also said, basically these planetary transits are also part of the set and setting, when we're doing, deep transformative work, when we're doing psychedelic assisted therapy with folks. Like we can't, in fact, he was really emphatic, and I've cited this piece that he wrote, correlation between holotropic states and planetary transits. He's referring to the fact that we, even if you don't know that this is happening, or even if you don't believe in astrology, you don't care about it, again, being that these are all energetic qualities, they're vast, complex, multivalent. There are many, many things going on. It's never as simple as just one thing. But these the repeating cycles of time, of these, kind of energetic qualities that occur are very much influencing us at the individual as well as the transpersonal level. Yeah, so that kind of sums it up. And then I also reference here in this slide the work of Richard Tarnas, who is a colleague and friend of Stan Grof, whose book Cosmos and Psyche really unpacks this in tremendous depth. As a historian, he looks at planetary configurations, outer planets, as well as Saturn, which is kind of the most distant of those traditional seven that you could see with the naked eye, but also incorporating Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto. These very slow moving outer planets. He, kind of unpacks, well, throughout history, what has happened when these specific types of configurations have occurred. Like we are just kind of moving out of this few years experiencing a square between Saturn and Uranus. What has happened historically during those, that particular type of configuration? Well, a lot of the revolutionary uprising of the 1960s, the French Revolution, like throughout history, the foment societally, tends to correspond with certain configurations, planetary configurations. So just having some knowledge of that will give you some insight to, kind of the broader picture of what folks are dealing with. As well, there's another concept that I mentioned here called Hellenistic timing techniques, and there are just a couple that I cite, although there are a few others. One being what's called annual profection, meaning that starting with the first house and the first year of life, every year of life following corresponds to a house of the chart. So depending on what year of life you're in, that corresponds to kind of highlight or pull focus on a specific house in the chart and the themes of that house. And I've included an annual profection table in the slides if you're curious. And another timing technique called zodiacal releasing, which is way too complex to get into here, but which can, if utilized to, kind of analyze someone's natal chart, give you some understanding into what specific focus may be happening, for them. And also, when to time certain therapeutic interventions. So So those are just a few ways that one might use this therapeutically. And I'd love to move into a couple of case studies. So I know there's a lot going on here for folks that may not be familiar with looking at natal charts, so don't worry about that. I'm going to point out the things that you need to know for what we're discussing. But so this first case, whose name we'll call Kay, their pronouns are they, them, and she, her, and Kay, let's see, has a natal chart here with Leo on the ascendant. So the sign of Leo was on the horizon at the time of their birth and at 25 degrees, which is pretty late in the sign. But as you see, Leo, which is this little squiggly line here, comprises the entire first house. So first house themes of self are going to be flavored by the specific delineations of the zodiac sign Leo. And we'll talk a bit more about what that is. Very, very reductively. I won't get into every detail. Right opposite their ascendant, if you kind of just look directly opposite, you've got their descendant at 25 degrees of Aquarius. So Leo and Aquarius are on the same axis. They're kind of two sides of the same coin there. So their house of relationships, the seventh house, and this point, the descendant is in Aquarius. So, and again, the delineations about what that means we'll unpack. So at the top of the chart, you've got the midheaven, which is the circle with a vertical line through it at 17 degrees Taurus. And then at the base of the chart, you've got their IC at 17 degrees Scorpio. And again, this Taurus Scorpio axis, they're, two sides of the same coin. They go together. So, and I've got here in the notes this phrase, which is that their sect is nocturnal, which means they were born at night. So basically, the traditional system cares whether you were born during the day or at night, because a different team of planets are kind of more active at night, and a different team are more active during the day. So basically, for example, the two planets that are luminaries that give us light, the sun and the moon, the sun, of course, is active during the day. The moon is active at night. So in a night chart, which is Kay's chart, the moon is the primary luminary. And the sun is not. The sun is, basically their luminary out of sect. So already, because the sun rules the sign of Leo, and planetary rulership is a whole other sort of complex, conversation that I won't get into, but I'll just for now kind of say that this is one of the ways that we understand the conditions that affect these 4 points and these 4 houses. So we already know right off the bat that because the sun is the planet that rules the zodiac sign on their ascendant, that they already have a little bit of kind of a less than optimal, kind of set of circumstances influencing that first house. So, and their sun is in Virgo. They actually have a stellium of planets in Virgo in the second house, which includes Venus and Mars. And Venus is said to be in fall in the sign of Virgo. The reason for that is that Venus is exalted in the sign of Pisces, which is directly opposite the sign of Virgo. This is, again, more complex than we're going to unpack, but at the end of the PDF of slides, there's a planetary, what's called essential dignities chart that kind of elucidates this a little bit further if you're curious. So essential dignities just has to do with what signs planets are happiest in, like what conditions are the most favorable, and which ones are the most unfavorable, and what's kind of meh, So it gives you more insight into being able to interpret kind of what the hand you were dealt is, right? So you can strengthen in some ways things that are maybe less than optimal, and things that might be really loud in your chart, you can maybe kind of work with to soften. So Lastly, K's Saturn is in Scorpio. So Saturn is the ruler of Aquarius, and it is in their fourth house of Scorpio, kind of co-present there with the IC. So that's all, sort of meaningful in terms of, again, this signification of Saturn being something that's about, structure, separation, boundaries, kind of this sort of intense, sometimes challenging, kind of set of circumstances. So sometimes, that can create some challenges when it's ruling your seventh house of relationships. So that just gives a little bit of backdrop. Now I'll unpack a bit for you, K's axes that are on their first and seventh house of self and relationships, and then their 10th and 4th house of being out in the world and private home life. So the Leo Aquarius axis is considered a fixed modality, meaning that rather than being something that initiates, which are the cardinal signs, or mutable, which is kind of allowing the season to pass into the next season, fixed signs hold steady. They do what they do, and they're fixed. They basically are. The energy is stable, right? And particularly because we've got both of these axes, both the MC, IC, ascendant, and descendant on fixed axes. That's a lot of fixed energy. That's a lot of like holding steady energy. So this is someone, I mean, as someone who has fixed angles, I don't think that it's, I would be remiss to say that, fixed energy can be like a little stubborn. So anyway, not to, kind of put that on K, but fixed energy, right? It's just like holding steady. So the Leo sign is a fire sign. Aquarius is an air sign. Again, the planetary rulers are Sun and Saturn. So Sun is kind of like the center of our self. It's sort of like, what is our purpose in life that we're here to, sort of follow. Saturn, again, is that planet of restriction and boundary. If we had to kind of sum up Leo and Aquarius, I would say Leo is the me sign. I'm the sun, I'm shining, I want everyone to look at me. And Aquarius is the we, the collective. That's obviously very reductive. There's much more to it, but just to give you a snapshot. And then in the traditional system, Leo was considered the sign of kings or rulers. Leo the lion, right, the king. Whereas Aquarius sort of is representative of the populace. So the Taurus Scorpio axis, again, that fixed energy, but now we've got fixed earth and water. So fixed earth of Taurus is very, kind of sturdy and very grounded. Scorpio, known for its depth, right? So emotional depth. It's a water sign. Not afraid to go into the most, kind of potentially going into things that other people run away from. Like has no problem, discussing any topic that may be taboo, or kind of getting into the emotional muck. Really has an affinity for it, in fact. So the rulers of Taurus and Scorpio are Venus and Mars, which, I'm sure folks kind of know, Venus and Mars, their reputation for being, kind of polarized or, kind of can be somewhat oppositional. The Venusian qualities of beauty, rest, abundance, love, relationality, pleasure, and the martial qualities of being assertive, sometimes combative. Absolutely anything having to do with conflict is a martial conflict delineation. But we wouldn't get anywhere without the assertive qualities of Mars. So and if we only had Venusian kind of pleasure filled energy, we would just kind of be gluttonous. So anyway, so just to kind of give you a sense, like nothing is better than the other, right? It's just different, qualities. And again, this is a super reductive, like, kind of snapshot. If we were to, again, this one word description of the Taurus Scorpio axis, I'd say, Taurus is the garden and Scorpio is the compost. It's sort of like, the Empress card in the tarot deck. It would be Taurus, and Scorpio might be the death card, So understanding these cycles of death and rebirth need to occur. So, so the themes that were occurring in Kay's life at the time of our work with their natal chart, they are a therapist and a performer, and they have a desire to bring psychodrama into their therapeutic practice. They're kind of in a bit of a career transition. They recently left a longstanding group therapy practice after a tumultuous change in ownership of the practice and set out to start their own business. They're currently experiencing, or were at the time, some challenges and a physical separation with their significant other. And all of those significant happenings were bringing up family of origin and inner child concerns. So you can see how all of those issues, kind of affect these first, fourth, seventh, and 10th house themes of self, and particularly this, kind of Leo sun, kind of performer on stage, kind of quality. The fourth house of this interior inner child, kind of exiled parts like insecurities. The seventh house of relationships, experiencing, transition and separation. And then the 10th house of career, wanting to bring a more artistic flair, undergoing these, changes to bring, kind of more sort of beauty, art, flair, drama to their work. So the transits that were this person was experiencing at the time, we are kind of just moving out of an 18-month period where eclipses have been taking place on the Taurus and Scorpio axis. And those were occurring in Kay's fourth and 10th house. So their fourth house of these home, interior, family of origin, insecurities being shaken up house, and then the 10th house of career, dramatic beginnings and endings. Eclipses tend to bring beginnings and endings and, kind of sometimes very abrupt, unforeseen transitions. In addition, transiting Saturn was in their 7th house of relationships. So Saturn, again, as I've mentioned, is the ruler of their 7th house, but also in real time, Saturn, for all of us, is transiting, about to, kind of transition here, not in March, I think, to Pisces, but has been in the sign of Aquarius for the last 2-ish years. So bringing concepts, themes of separation, boundary issues, some separation, and kind of just general challenges to relationships. As well, Uranus is in Taurus, their 10th house of career, Uranus being kind of this like radical, revolutionary, sudden energy, bringing about dramatic change. And Saturn and Uranus have been in a square, which again is a transpersonal kind of revolutionary moment that we're all in. Finally, Kay is 36 years old, which puts them at a first house annual profection year. So themes of self and the sun as the planetary ruler of the first house are kind of taking central focus. So that is kind of that was what the clock was saying. There's like what Kay was saying when she came in, and then looking at the clock and what time it is. This is kind of what the transiting astrology had to say. So working with Kay, we discussed various ways that that they could build on developing new outlets for self-expression, basically working with the fact that they're in this first house profection year, their sun is the planetary ruler, their sun is already, kind of as being, out of a luminary out of sect, and, other aspects and conditions affecting their sun, not in the strongest point. They really want to perform, they really want to put themselves out there, but we're experiencing some hesitation for that. So talking about ways that we could, enhance the first house, concepts of self, affirmations, other, kind of methods of bringing creative endeavors to their life. Doing some deeper work to tend to those exiled parts, really, kind of deepening into IFS, which, was one of the modalities that she, kind of began exploring to tend to these sort of childhood insecurities that were arising at that IC, that low point in the chart. And in addition, we discussed doing specific timing of practices around her therapeutic and spiritual practice to support her luminary of sect, her moon, as well as her Venus, which, Venus in Virgo is not, again, Venus being kind of the relational planet in the chart, and K's benefic of sect, meaning her most friendly and agonistic or supportive planet in a night chart. Cultivating stronger relationships with those two planets. So some of the ways that she did that were through, creating altars, putting out fresh flowers, setting up, beautiful space to, kind of strengthen and enhance their relationship with those planets, doing planetary remediations, kind of specific devotional, kind of practices at times and days associated with, being kind of favorable for those planets. Additionally, she was working with some microdosing and, kind of timed some of that work to sort of coincide with specific beneficial timing around working with the Venusian and lunar calendar. And aspects. So those were some of the things that she did. And sometimes it's just, bringing attention and care, to these areas. I mean, it's like the planets are out there, but they're also in here, right? And it's like, this map of the night sky at the moment of our birth, which is continually, it's sort of the natal promise that's continually unfolding and being pinged by other people that we come into contact with, and planetary transits, and any number of other things that we encounter, but all of this, it's sort of like as above, so below, as within, so without. All of these things are, kind of simultaneously, we're enhancing those qualities internally when we're building an altar to Venus, right? We're enhancing our own, kind of beauty, art, creativity, relationality, kind of when we do that. So that's kind of the overview of K. And I think I'm doing okay on time. So I'll move on to my second case study, which is A. Okay. So, okay, so A has their ascendant, A also uses they, them pronouns. A's ascendant is at 29 degrees and 30 minutes of Capricorn. We actually did the process that I mentioned, to ascertain, kind of look at someone's timeline and ascertain, ensure that this is in fact the correct ascendant. We did that process because if you change the time on this chart, even by a matter of seconds, the ascendant moves into Aquarius. So for a while, A wasn't sure if they had actually a Capricorn or an Aquarius rising sign, but based on significant events in their life, we came to the determination that it's most probably a Capricorn ascendant, which actually makes them a triple Capricorn because they've got their moon and their sun in Capricorn as well. So in that first house, their rising, their ascendant, and their house of self is Capricorn. Opposite, directly opposite, their seventh house of relationships, that descendant is in Cancer. So we're dealing with the Capricorn Cancer axis. And the midheaven for this chart is actually in the 11th house. Again, the midheaven being kind of a calculation based upon, what the highest point of the chart it can land in the whole sign house system between houses 9, 10, or 11. In this chart, it's in the 11th house of community and friends, in the sign of Scorpio. And then their their IC, their lowest point, is at 15 degrees of Taurus in their 5th house of pleasure and play. So again, we're dealing here with the Scorpio-Taurus axis. So we've already talked a bit about that, but we'll recap again. So what's new information here is the Capricorn-Cancer axis. So this axis is on what's called the cardinal modality. So the cardinal signs are the initiators, the signs that ultimately are the transitions between seasons. So Capricorn is the winter solstice, Cancer is the summer solstice, Libra is the autumn equinox, and Aries is the spring equinox. So those 4, cross-quarter days that we talked about way back at the beginning are on the cardinal axes of the zodiac. So as such, these are initiating signs. They have, good starting energy. Capricorn is also known for its tremendous staying power and capacity to build things that are built to last. It's ruled by Saturn, which, again, as I've mentioned a few times, structure, boundaries, but also building, building structures, building institutions, building stable foundations. This is, these are the key delineations for Capricorn. So on the other hand, Cancer, which rules the 7th house of relationships, and the descendant, the ruler of Cancer is the moon. So the moon is quite the opposite. It's very changeable. Every 2.5 days, the moon is changing signs. Throughout the lunar cycle, the moon is, changing shape, coming into fullness and fading away. So very different. But I've heard this stated. One of the astrologers whose work I really admire, Diana Rose Harper, said that we can think of Capricorn as like being the milk bucket that you're going to use to milk the cow that's been in your family for generations, right? And it's the structure that's going to hold the milk, right? So Cancer is known as the sign of the nurturer, right? It's associated with all of the zodiac signs are associated, with parts of the body, and Cancer is associated with the breasts and with breast milk, with producing nourishment, for the next generation, right? So both of these signs have themes of building something that's meant to last, right? It's just that Capricorn's the structure, and then Cancer is the actual nourishment itself. So I think that's all we need to say about that. And then that Taurus Scorpio axis, as I mentioned before, fixed energy, kind of tends to be, kind of a stable, energy, earth and water elements, which the Capricorn Cancer axis are also earth and water. Cancer being a water sign, Capricorn being an earth, cardinal earth. And again, the Venus Scorpio axis are ruled by Venus, or I'm sorry, the Taurus Scorpio axis are ruled by Venus and Mars. So we'll go on to the themes that A was experiencing at the time of this conversation. So A had recently encountered some significant shifts in their community. There was a major falling out in their friend group, particularly with one significant friend who had also been their employer. This friend had owned a business where A had been employed. So the fallout meant that not only did it, create some disruption and loss in their community of friends, but it also affected their career, what they're known for, what they put out in the world. So again, although we're not dealing with the 10th house here of career and sort of these external kind of what you're known for related themes, we have the midheaven, and that point is still contains those general delineations, those concepts, even though for A it falls in the 11th house of community and friend groups. So it tracks. And then in addition, A was experiencing a strain in their partnership, and the challenges that they were encountering had a lot to do with feeling enmeshed and feeling that there were codependency issues in their relationship that they were struggling to get a handle on. So because of these major life transitions, A decided to temporarily relocate so that they could focus on themselves and have some alone time. And during this time, they were doing parts work. They were having a really wonderful time living on an organic farm and spending a lot of time in nature in a really, really beautiful location. So that's what was happening in A's life. And then the corresponding transits that were occurring, again, we're dealing with the Scorpio Taurus axis because similar to K, A has their midheaven and IC, their MC and IC on the Scorpio Taurus axis, although in this case they're reversed. So the midheaven, the highest point in the chart, is in Scorpio, and the IC or the lowest point is in Taurus. So different placements, but same general descriptions of what those signs mean. And again, also experiencing eclipses there. So for A, the major fallout with their friend in the 11th house of friend groups affected their career. That was in Scorpio where these eclipses took place, as well as Taurus, which for them was in the 5th house of creativity, playfulness, pleasure. It can also denote children. A doesn't have children, but they were, kind of experiencing a very highly pleasure-filled period following these, major disruptions where they took themselves off to nature. So, in addition, in their first house, right, kind of just adjacent or conjoined with their ascendant, Pluto in Capricorn has been sitting for a very long time. Pluto's a very slow-moving planet, but it's been in Capricorn for, gosh, I think the transit's 18 years. I'm not certain that's accurate. Don't quote me. Zach probably knows, but in any case, slow-moving planet has been in Capricorn for quite some time, and we in any case maybe it's 8 years anyhow. So that's or anyway, I just want to mostly emphasize the Pluto factor here, because Pluto is a planet of that can create some upheaval by bringing what is below the surface up for consideration. So here's an example that's not a personal chart. This is the chart of the United States of America. It's one of a few different charts that have been drawn up, but the Sibley chart, it's called, which is the July 4th, the signing of the Declaration chart. And in that chart, Pluto is at the basically the same degree that it currently is at right now. So we've been undergoing in the United States over these last couple years a planetary return of Pluto, which again, all of the stuff that the country was founded upon is coming up to the surface to be reckoned with. Any structures that aren't kind of stable because of kind of what is at the foundation are being dredged up to be reckoned with. So on a personal level, those same kinds of things happen, kind of, although in a different way. These outer planets are very transpersonal and generational. but they can have personal effects. They deal with power, personal power, our relationship with authority, these Plutonian themes. So as well, in their ascendant, in A's first house, over these last couple of years, they've had major astrological transits. So there was a conjoining of Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, all in the sign of Capricorn in 2020. So there's been a lot going on for them these last couple of years that has really kind of affected and kind of shaken up their sense of self, in addition to these, external themes. So, and lastly, at 47 years old, they were in their 12th house profection year. And the 12th house is the house, according to the traditional system, that's called the joy of Saturn. So the Saturnian themes of separation and boundaries and restriction are very much consistent with themes of that house. So isolation and withdrawal. Okay, so what I discussed with A was working with that Capricorn Cancer axis to help restore some balance in that structure, the Capricorn structure of that bucket, and the milk, right? The nurturing, the relationship, sort of enmeshment that they were experiencing, where, Cancer being a nurturer, being a giver, being a compassionate sign, really wants to just, sometimes take on, or even if they don't want to, it's just not necessarily, even by choice, it's just the empathic quality of someone else's, kind of emotional content being, indistinguishable, kind of from one's own. So as well, A's Saturn is in Cancer, their natal Saturn is in Cancer. So we talked about ways to remediate Saturn, which is the ruler of Capricorn, their ascendant, their first house, so that they could kind of have a little bit, Saturn being the planet of boundaries and structure in the sign of Cancer, which is kind of like, I just want to provide, kind of all the love and nourishment that that you need. Like, how can I take care of you? It's sort of like the mother hen, not the best, kind of for establishing great boundaries. So we talked about ways to work with that, remediate Saturn, build a stronger relationship with Saturn, with this planet, right? That's such a strong, although, for them, Saturn is in fall, meaning its domicile or one of its home signs is Capricorn, and Cancer is opposite that. So it's in like its antithesis. If this is sort of its like, happy place, it's very much not happy place. So one of these quotes that to me kind of sums up the Saturn Cancer theme and strengthening it. Boundaries are the distance that I need to love you and me at the same time. That's from Prentice Hemphill. So, and so we also have, let's see. Yes. Oh, so A also has their Venus, their, planet of relationship, in the sign of Aquarius. So Saturn is the ruler of Aquarius as well. So, and it's the ruler of their IC, that interior, kind of personal, kind of point in the chart. So working a little bit with Venus as well, to Venus being kind of this relational sign isn't very much well at home in Aquarius, which is kind of about the collective, and it's somewhat impersonal. So, so again, working with the planet, working with their benefics, which are these, kind of friendly, supportive planets with Venus as well as Jupiter. So, and again, timing some of their own personal psychedelic work and other, kind of holotropic experiences, breath work, and other things that they were doing to better support, particularly their first house and, kind of strengthen that seventh house. So working with timing in particular. And, this person was doing, kind of large dose psilocybin sessions by themselves. Like that was the thing for them that was the most potent, kind of in their healing journey. So, so we worked on ways that they could time those, again, because they've got their moon in Capricorn, and, time it with the lunar cycle and time it in ways on Saturdays, for example, which is Saturn's day. and how the day Saturday got named Saturday. Okay, so here's the grand finale, a synastry chart. So this looks like a big mess because it's actually two charts mashed together. So there's a lot going on, but I'll walk you through it. So the previous two charts that we've covered, A and K, are actually two people that are in a committed romantic relationship. And I mentioned that they, kind of, they have very different perspectives on, what's happening, as we've kind of talked through, but, they had been physically separated, due to A, needing to take some time away, working on some of the enmeshment stuff, K needing to, kind of feeling like, that Leo ascendant really needed to shine. And if the partner wasn't going to be the sole recipient of that, they didn't know where to put it. So both of those, factors came into play. Let's see, other things that I want to point out about the synastry or the sort of overlap in these two charts. For one thing, their moons are in the exact same degree of 11 Capricorn. And because A is a Capricorn rising, that means that their partner's moon is in their first house of self. So the moon being kind of the significator of the emotional self, as well as the body, but, largely, kind of the reservoir of the emotions, to have, your partner's moon in your first house of self, again, particularly when the seventh house is in Cancer, this enmeshment theme, is, it's difficult to distinguish what's mine and what's yours, right? So, so as a couple, we kind of talk through ways to work with these angles, work with the angular houses, each individually and then together, to kind of work with that. And then lastly, as I mentioned, they both have their MC and IC on the Scorpio Taurus axis, but they're flipped. So that means that K's MC in Scorpio in their 10th house of career, it falls in A's IC, which is in their 5th house of pleasure and creative endeavors. And vice versa. K's 4th house in Taurus of kind of that interior world and roots, family of origin, is in their partner's 11th house, their MC, right, which is kind of their most outward facing. So although opposites attract, sometimes the modalities, the planetary rulers and the goals of, these different signs can be, can create points of tension, right? So their needs are very different in terms of, how they're working with these key points in their chart as individuals and then sort of as partners. This chart basically is the same thing. It's just from the other side. So we've got K's chart on the ascendant here as the outer wheel, and then their partner's chart on the inside. So, and again, just sort of a repetition of what I just said. So, getting to what, kind of our conversation was about, kind of how to work with this information and how to, kind of incorporate this along their healing journey, right? Both as individuals on this trajectory of, the cyclical medicine path, the medicine wheel, as well as, kind of a couple, obviously not having the same walk, but, kind of hopefully being able to do that side by side. So, so a discussion about the axes of the zodiac and how it was showing up in their angular charts in those 4 points, the cardinal points in their charts, and how those, were showing up in their relational dynamics was really helpful. Just even to know, kind of that there was this other language for understanding. They are both highly emotionally intelligent individuals. They're both therapists. They have a lot of other frameworks that they use as well. Very well versed in attachment styles and both, working with IFS, both doing independent work with psychedelic medicine, as well as couples work here. And so, so we just talked about ways that they could time and plan their psychedelic or holotropic, kind of work as a couple to enhance their home life, right? To work with this Taurus Scorpio axis and sort of bring Venus and Mars, the rulers of those, sort of opposing, but complementary signs together, right? So that is basically the summary of the work I wanted to present. I'm sharing with you some references, and as well at the end, like I said, there are a number of additional, resources that you can just kind of look through. So let me go ahead and stop sharing, because I think that that's all I need to show you for now. I don't know if that shut it off. I hope it did.
I think so. It did for me
Okay.
at least.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. I could listen to you all day, honestly.
Well, thank you. I'm glad it was well received. And I know we've got time for questions or discussion, and, whatever parts of it are, pertinent or, salient for folks, I'm excited to discuss.
Mm-hmm. As folks are kind of gathering their thoughts, one of the things I do is just ask initial questions that are like low-hanging fruit. And you actually gave us a good showcase of how best to utilize. That was going to be my first connection, is how best to utilize this practice around psychedelic science.
Mm-hmm.
That's the therapeutic aspect of it. And moving in, I was wondering, as I was just reminded throughout the presentation of different ways this could be translated by different folks, really. And especially since this is a really classic version, which I really appreciate a lot. I was wondering what you thought has been specifically around aspects of the patriarchy, where you see this here, this is where your father is, or this is what your outward self looks like. I wanted to get your thoughts on what has kind of changed around those aspects, or been changed over the past several centuries.
Oh, that's such a great question. Thank you for asking that. Well, I mean, a lot of the contemporary astrologers that I follow, whose work has informed me and my understanding, who are practicing and teaching traditional Hellenistic astrology today, including some folks who were directly involved with Project Hindsight and translating those original texts. Many have a very radical, decolonial, patriarchal framework, where there's a lot of care and attention given to holding to sort of the essence of, kind of the original teachings, but adapting it, to in a contemporary way, with a contemporary understanding that includes an analysis of power and privilege. So one of the astrologers who I mentioned, Diana Rose Harper, is a prime example of that. She's absolutely brilliant. Another person who maybe is a little bit less, kind of oriented toward this himself, but he very much through his platform, brings in people with, kind of strong expertise. And that's Chris Brennan, who's the host of the Astrology podcast and a teacher of traditional astrology, published a couple of books that are, brilliant. So a lot of people who are practicing today, and they're all younger, I mean, I'm learning, from a lot of astrologers who are, considerably younger than me, and I learned from, kind of traditional and, kind of experienced and seasoned, kind of mature astrologers as well. Although I would say, there's probably less of an analysis there. And I don't know if you're familiar with Chani Nicholas. I'm sure, she's become kind of a household name, but she really has, kind of popularized a traditional Hellenistic astrological approach with a political analysis. And I mean, she's she probably leads the pack. I mean, I didn't even think to mention her first because she's, like I said, such a household name. She has an app now. She has a book. She, has a website, tons of free information, through her social media. I mean, lots of great places to find her work. But yeah, so I'm seeing it really, a very deconstructed approach where, kind of gender concepts and, some of these, kind of more patriarchal, archaic, kind of conceptualizations are just sort of set aside or, kind of mentioned, like, for example, like in the traditional system, all of the planets are gendered, and a lot of, contemporary astrologers just refuse to use those, or, they acknowledge maybe the gender that they understand the planet through their own relationship, right? And, or, kind of really highlight the fluidity of, and the multivalence of, a lot of the planetary archetypes. Venus is like traditionally depicted as like the Aphrodite and, this like feminine goddess. And while that's like a lot of those things are absolutely true, it's not like it's so reductive, to think. I mean, in the Mesoamerican traditions, the Aztec calendar and, kind of the Mayan, calendar and just sort of the conceptualizations of the planet Venus, which was absolutely central to the profound astroarchaeological work that was done in by the Maya and the Aztec. Venus was understood as Quetzalcoatl, who is a male god, right? And I think you and I talked about this before, in its morning star phase was kind of was the planet of war, right? But in the evening star, when relaxed and generative, was like peace and love and beauty and, kind of more, kind of pleasure, art, creativity, right? So, and yeah, so even, the distinction that there's multiple, kind of beings within one, kind of planetary archetype, I think is kind of fits with a lot of the way that contemporary folks are looking at that now.
Thank you. Yes, I'm remembering that conversation. It's something that's been sticking with me and comes up in several of my conversations when it comes to archetypes. One of that would bring me into a question of kind of the season of healing, really, where there were aspects of Mars for a lot of cultures that in the fall time frame, this was just a known time to be able to kind of succumb or allow yourself to start to heal a little bit. And I wondered if you could speak to that.
Yeah. So I think, right. I mean, I think that sort of coincides with, just again, that reference to both Venus and Mars and their synodic cycle, which is referring to the complete rotation basically of, I mean, we're very familiar with, and I showed you that little GIF of, kind of the Earth on its axis, like going around the sun, but like all of the planetary, which most of them are at least they're, kind of elliptical. I mean, Venus is the most, spherical, but, and then some are really strange, like Uranus is bizarre in its, kind of, elliptical path. But like they all have seasons, right? They're not, in fact, the same framework that we've been sort of kind of talking about, this sort of medicine wheel concept, or, these, I mean, and I don't even want to frame it as a medicine wheel because I don't, want to, kind of at all, kind of present it in a way that, is appropriative, but just to say that, since humans have existed on this planet, we've looked at the sky, right? And we've understand our place in the web of life through these changing seasons. And particularly, when we're looking at the planets and their movement, it may take years, right, for a planet to, kind of go from its let's say it's rebirth, which is when it, comes into conjunction with the sun, it disappears. You can't see it with the naked eye, right? For days before and days after. During, Venus's retrograde cycle, for example, it's 40 days and 40 nights, right? I mean, these are archetypal concepts for thousands of years, that humans have really understood and mirrored, right? So that it is a season of retreat, it is a season of healing. Like, this is not the time for outward activity, or, I mean, again, like, the Aztecs, used Venus and the synodic cycle of Venus to time when it was suitable to enter into and engage in conflict, right, with their, people, with their enemies or whatever, what have you. And other times were not for that. They were for, cultivating artwork, for, healing, for being in community, so whether it's, kind of Mars is sort of, I mean, I think through the Western model, Mars kind of gets assigned all of those, qualities of, like, those martial qualities, but, Venus very much has them as well. And, and again, I think it has to do with these longer cycles of time, the fact that it takes, like, several years for the cycle to begin and then complete, right? And so this is the season that you're in. Yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question, but
it brought my mind into the fact again too, that every culture is going to have its own take on this and own influence as to what we ascribe. And also I wondered too, this getting started in different parts of the world, where different planets are more visible at different times, maybe is a thing. But my last one that I was gonna throw out there was around the transpersonal theory. So I really respect your ability to not just say that all indigenous cultures have this kind of same thing, but there I wondered what you have found as somebody who also has been studying this for a while. For me, I've seen a similar use of this kind of spiritual journey that people go on, and it has been seen as a way to kind of utilize this practice as a way to navigate your spiritual development over time, over several lifetimes for that matter. And I wondered if that had differed in anything you had seen before in other cultures, in other places where people have been practicing this, or what that was like from your point of view.
That's great. Well, I'm not very familiar with the Vedic system, which I know is also complex, and there are many different branches and subtypes. But my understanding from what I know is that that's kind of built into that particular, astrological system. It's just that, the understanding is that there is, reincarnation, and in this incarnation, this is the, path that you, have been karmically assigned, and it will unfold as it will. And, ultimately the goal is to attain a state of, completion, evolution of the soul, learning on, the physical plane, what have you, right? That isn't necessarily built into the Western framework, although from what I understand of the traditional Hellenistic model, and how disturbingly kind of deterministic things get, the deeper that you get into understanding what you can do with the timing techniques with the natal chart. It's like there's free will and you're here to do as you please. And also, it's just a little bizarre at how much, even if it's not predictive of exactly what will happen, that there's predictive information encoded in the natal chart from the moment you were born that informs, I mean, it's not like a static moment. It's like this, like, moving, kind of like breathing organism that's continuing to unfold, and different parts of the chart are active at different times. And there are certain transits that you will never experience in this lifetime, and certain ones that you will, that other humans haven't, right? And that is, kind of inherently, although it's maybe not like made explicit that this is like karmic or that it's, soul evolution, like the evolutionary astrology very much interprets it that way. But even if you don't use that lens, it's kind of like, well, I mean, it's it's sort of yeah, I mean it's a little eerie, because I think without kind of a grounding in sort of, some kind of, spiritual, framework or comprehension or cosmology of how this fits in with, the multiverse and all possible realities and all possible lifetimes, I mean, the idea that we're, actually simultaneously one consciousness having all of these experiences at the same time, like as a mass evolving single, like entity with the same endpoint, which is reunification, I mean, like all of that is, I don't know. I mean, it's fascinating. I don't know that anyone really knows, but there's a lot of systems seem to kind of point to a similar, kind of concept.
Right on. Thank you. I really appreciate that. My laptop is about to die, so I may have to go find a charger real quick. But if anybody else has questions, I think we lost folks going over the marker.
Yeah, I know Tyler has somewhere to be soon, so.
Yeah. Well, I just had a question that kind of occurred to me that I would be interested to hear your thoughts on. So going back to what you said about, I'll be honest, I'm still, pretty skeptical of it. And there's a lot that I kind of have to overcome to get to a place where I'm fully on board. But it's fascinating to me. And going back to what you said about like even between like twins, having them be born like minutes apart, and how that can affect their chart. Something that kind of is occurring to me. I had actually was able to find my birth certificate and get my birth time, and I actually gave all my stuff to Zach, and he gave me a little impromptu reading. It was really nice, really fun. But it made me wonder how accurate that number, the time might be. Like, I don't know if they like, as soon as my head popped out, did they like write down the time, or is it like, after the fact, they're like, oh, I think he was out around this time.
Right.
We can't really count necessarily on how accurate
Yes.
that timestamp is. And I wonder how that might work into like how much we can like rely on the specificity of the birth time.
Absolutely. That's a great question. So it can vary. And often if you see a birth time that's been rounded to the nearest 5 or 0, it's probably not exactly precise. And you may or may not be able to do anything about that. But one thing that you can do, depending upon what degree the ascendant is at and how that influences, and again, there are different house systems that different astrologers use, and one is not better than another. They're just different and they provide different information. But
sure,
in the whole sign house system, the degree of the ascendant determines the first house, and it determines all of the rest of the entire interpretation of the chart. So if that's off by a few minutes and you're at the end of or the beginning of, kind of the 30-degree segment, it really can significantly change the interpretation. So, and that's kind of where that process that I mentioned, it's called rectification. It can be done. I have done a couple of them just as I'm trying to learn the process. I'm not like a professional practicing astrologer. I actually do like completely other things for most of my professional work. But people who, like there are folks that do that, that's what they do. They'll ask you for, kind of a detailed history, and based on these various timing techniques that I haven't really unpacked but have sort of touched on, you can with shocking accuracy, like kind of hone in on what is very much likely to be, at least close enough that you have the information that you need to work with. And, and to the point of being a skeptic, I'm like, great, I mean, that definitely be a skeptic. I mean, this to me, I'm not like, a cult follower of astrology. I have gotten more and more interested in it the deeper that I've studied, and mostly because the roots are, kind of these understandings of, kind of the relationship of being human on the planet. It's just like, it's not about like something that's even necessarily inherently predictive, although, the more you learn, the more you find that things are like disturbingly predictive, even if not like about like what it actually will be, but just to say that like it's going to be something, it's going to be something, and it's going to be in this area of life, and it's going to be something like this or close to it, and I don't specialize in predictive astrology. That's not my cup of tea, but just studying my own natal chart and looking at some of the timing techniques that have shown me for the first, I haven't gone forward into the future, but my life up until now, like basically to the day, predicted like when my younger siblings would be born. And I'm like, how can my natal chart contain information about like when my sibling would be, my step sisters who like weren't even conceived by the same, paternal father would be born? Like that to me, it's just like I had to put it down and walk away, because I'm just like, that's actually a little bit too much. So
I think in my just in this period of my life, I'm definitely skeptical, but I think the deeper I've gone into science, the more I'm like even skeptical of that. I'm open to like different ways of knowing, and I'm just like, it's like I want to believe, because it's I love how much these other ways of knowing incorporate storytelling, and oh, getting a call. So I really appreciate all this information, and it's like a lot of it's going right over my head, but like it's fascinating. And
okay, cool. Well, thank you. And I'm glad, I mean, I am also a scientist, and I really very much believe that like if you get deep enough into science, it'll take you toward, mysticism, like they converge. And,
that's what I'm discovering. It's like, it's the ways that we've developed and all agreed that to do science are another very specific way that also like cleaves off another, all kinds of other possibilities for looking at these things that we still have a very small sliver of information on. So
absolutely. Absolutely. And, if you want to, this whole piece about, other ways of knowing, and, I mean, like traditional ecological knowledge, which is like indigenous science, frankly, it's science, empirical evidence-based science. If you even just dip your toe into some of the astroarchaeology evidence that's out. I mean, just basically look at like Chaco Canyon, look at Chichen Itza, look at the Mesoamerican. I mean, I don't even know the Egyptian pyramids as well, but like I'm very familiar with the Mesoamerican and Native American astroarchaeology. It's just like, I have no idea, but they had such advanced mathematics, astronomy, physics, such a like precise understanding that they constructed observatories and entire like miles and miles worth of structures, and kind of like an entire kind of ecosystem based upon the movements of the sun and moon and Venus, and presumably other kind of the Milky Way, the Pleiades. I mean, so it's just like I mean, to me, like looking at what people were doing on this planet like thousands and thousands of years ago is very meaningful because like, you know, like modern science as we know it is like in its infancy, you know, and
Yeah.
we're also like ruining the planet. So
Yeah.
I feel like
So there's some things
maybe
we're missing.
there's some things we're missing. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I
All
appreciate you. I
right.
have to head out and go to
Yeah.
class, but feel
Thank
free
you.
to continue to chat.
Okay. Thank you. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
I guess that, Donnie, do you have a conversation? Do you have a question of any kind? I don't want to cut you off, but I got one more myself.
I wish I had questions. I'm pretty flooded, but I'm really enjoying the conversation. And I have things to say to you, Zach, when you stop recording this.
Okay. All right. I wondered if there was a point in time during each year where my mind goes, we talk about the different seasons, the fall, if there are time frames because in which it would be best to heal actually culturally as a group, but also for individuals. Sometimes I gotta believe it's about the individual chart and where those transits are going to align for that person. But I wondered if there was a certain time collectively for us to heal that you had maybe stumbled upon.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely a huge proponent of collective and community healing, you know, group psychedelic sessions, communal ritual, you know, kind of just community based, you know, kind of like healing and therapeutic process. So obviously that sort of transcends the individual and like I must time this only so that it's precisely correct for myself. So I don't believe that that's the case. I mean, for me, doing that kind of ritual work around the changing of the seasons is just like, you know, absolutely imperative. And then, you know, in addition to those four, you know, kind of cardinal points, there are, you know, kind of cross-quarter days that are the midpoint in between each of those as well, you know. So and and then seasonally, in terms of like in North America, when it is, you know, winter time, let's say, this is a very internal time, like on the medicine wheel, you know, this is kind of like it's an interior time. Like, you know, in the old days, right? Like people would be inside, like they would have harvested the food for the season and you know they're not out, you know, I mean it's just like we're inside, we're telling stories, right? This is the time of community and you know being together, and whereas you know like in the summer, you know, spring and summer, you know, we're out, you know, kind of beginning to like plant the, you know, for plant the garden or you know kind of begin to you know do the gathering, you know, in the fall, like collecting the harvest, right? So those are more kind of external times. Not that there can't be healing and ritual and ceremony, you know, like, I mean, because I believe that we need more ritual and ceremony embedded into our daily life, like at all times, you know, but I guess seasonally, you know, maybe I just am inclined to think, you know, probably those more interior, the energy is more internal. That is feels good.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Gosh, I'm so excited we recorded this. Thank you so much for that.
I guess I do have a question.
Okay.
That it's probably a layman's question, but did the hemispheres affect? I mean, because they affect seasons,
Right.
so would they affect like if I was born in Australia in October, am I
Mhm.
still a Libra? Like because it's not fall there.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it is because if you follow the tropical zodiac in Western astrology, it's it's subjective based on the time of where you're and the location of where you were born, but we're still using the same system. And so at this point, like I said, it doesn't directly match the constellations that are there or the seasonality. Like in some parts of this country, we don't have 4 seasons. That doesn't really matter according to the Western system, because it's a system of divination. It's a system of archetypal, imagination, pattern recognition. It's more kind of symbolic than it is necessarily strictly like, you were born, near the autumn equinox. So yeah, so it doesn't really matter. Although when it comes to how the equinoxes and the solstices are observed, that's like the opposite in the Southern Hemisphere. So when we're having our winter solstice, they're having their summer solstice. So, so contemporary astrologers that are taking like a non-US centric, kind of like approach will acknowledge here in North America, we're observing, the winter solstice, and, elsewhere you're, experiencing this, and the themes are different, but also, the important thing is just being in the rhythm of and in relationship to like the land where you are, right? So good question. So cool. Well, thank you so much for for having me and
noted the time and
great discussion. Yeah.
I'm supposed to be in a meeting now with MAPS, so I should probably go to that.
Probably should. All right. Well, I'll jump off because I know you both have to talk. But thanks again, Zach, and we'll talk soon. Yeah.
Yes,
thank you.
we will. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
I don't know how to turn this thing off, dude.
I didn't really have anything to say. I was gonna tease you because you still haven't read my chart yet.
Yes, I'm gonna do it. I think we should like spin the
You're just giving it to everybody around me.
once.
Tyler's got one. Alyssa's got one. Rebecca clearly got one. She gave you information. Then you did a combo, but I still have no idea about myself.
You have a
Now go to your conversation with Maps. Do not half-ass my reading.
we're gonna spend the afternoon together and we're gonna do it. I promise. Once I get
Especially now, because this was a ton of information. So that I don't really understand, that I feel like would probably, be easier to digest if I was, if it was next to my own chart. And I'm like, oh, okay, so that makes sense with this. That's what this is referring to. Like,
yes.
This was an overload of high level information without a lot of frame of reference.
I love it.
And you're just like, oh, this is awesome. And I was like, man, I have no clue what's going on right now. Edit this video and take out this last 45 seconds. Okay, go to your meeting. Love you. Bye.
Love you. Bye.